Hi, so yes, my name is Jo. I am a student at Oxford University at the Oxford Internet Institute, and we have a new master's called the MSc Social Data Science. So the whole idea is to try and apply computational techniques to social science questions. And I was a data scientist at the Ministry of Justice in the UK before, so I automatically have an interest in the legal side of things. So I wanted to look at the changes over time in textual coherence in US case law using the CAP dataset. So a brief outline of what I'm going to be talking about today is just the motivation around the question, why I chose text comprehension and textual coherence more specifically, then the methodology, like how I measured textual coherence and using latent semantic analysis in a process, how I designed the study, the results, and then the next steps, given that this is just like preliminary work. So the motivation around this is simply that, as you know, legal text is usually more difficult to understand for the general population. This is due to various aspects, syntactic complexity, so trying to fit as many conditions and contingencies in one sentence to make sure there's no misunderstandings there, and also lexical complexity, so trying to be as precise as possible, so using highly specialized vocabulary, but also like very outdated Latin and medieval terms to make sure you're extremely precise. So that led to a push in the 60s onwards to simplify the legal language as part of the plain English movement, some of you might know. But my question was more like, how can you simplify a text if you don't know what complex text means? So the idea was to see what comprehensibility of law means, and then also how it changed over time to be able to see if a movement like the plain English movement has improved textual comprehensibility or not. So text comprehension, bit of background, probably don't need to explain that much, is a reader's understanding of text. But then the second aspect, which is more measure or predictive comprehension, is textual coherence. So it's simply how information flows from one part of a discourse to the other, or just how an argument flows. So I want to use textual coherence to measure how this changes in case law over time. The methodology, I first introduced like the intuition behind it. So I'm using something called LSA. What LSA does is that it takes a text corpus and it finds topics in the corpus. So for example, here I have the fruit category, apple, oranges, berries. It finds a plant category, and then it finds some kind of household type category. And LSA basically does that by looking at the context in which words appear. So it allows you to look at the relationships, the semantic meaning of words, even though certain words haven't actually appeared together in the same sentence, but they might have appeared in the same context. So this is what LSA allows you to do, and allows you to then meaningfully compare them. What I'm trying to apply LSA to is to textual coherence. So if I can track the topics that a document is talking about over the sentences or paragraphs, I can look at whether there's overlap in topics from one sentence to another. So the first and second sentences are obviously talking about the same things, about fruits growing on certain trees or bushes. So they're similar in topics and therefore coherent. But then the third sentence talks about chairs in the kitchen. So obviously, if you saw an essay or a text like that, you wouldn't understand why the hell it starts talking about household items. So this is what I'm trying to do within case law text. So the way I designed this is I only looked at Illinois majority type cases from the 50s onwards, and I tried to train my LSA algorithm on that. However, what I'm trying to do is compare topics, and it's not fair to compare a text that was written in 2010 to a text that was written in the 50s. So I'm trying to extract the topics that are relevant to that decade. So I trained the LSA algorithm on the different decades. For example, in the 50s, applied LSA. I don't have time in 10 minutes to explain what the algorithm actually does. But if anyone wants to look at it, it basically uses singular value decomposition, which is a matrix decomposition, and can extract topics from this. So I invite you to look at that if you're interested. Step 2 is once I got the topics, I can look at the sentence-to-sentence coherence within a document. So the topics allow me to then translate these sentences into vectors in that topic space. The vectors then we can just mathematically calculate the distance between the vectors and see how similar one sentence is to the other. So it gives me a sentence-to-sentence coherence scores of adjoining sentences. If I do this across a document, I can average a score out and get an average coherence score of a document. But an average coherence score of 0.2 might not mean much, or 0.5. So I created also a baseline, and the idea is to create similar documents, talking about the law, talking about the same thing, but with no thought put through into the flow of the argument. So a very simple way, and probably not very intelligent way of doing this, is to just use the same sentences, create documents, but just shuffle the sentences around. So we're talking about the same things, we're talking about the same topics, but there's no argument flow at all. And then I can just apply the same thing, the sentence-to-sentence coherence, and get the average coherence score. In terms of results, once I applied this, I eyeballed the LSA topics to just make sure that it's not giving me gibberish. As you can see, the four I chose were like the top ones, and they seem to intuitively make sense and group things together the right way. There are other topics that seem very specific to cases, like airport, policyholder, and pollution. You wouldn't necessarily find them by themselves, but in the cases, it seemed to make sense. You also have another one which I originally didn't understand, but collapsed client collector seems to relate to like bankruptcy cases. So yeah, the LSA topics seem to actually intuitively make sense, which was reassuring. In terms of the actual trends and the results, this is what I found. So the blue line is the current scores of the case documents, and the orange line is my shuffled baseline. A score closer to 1 indicates a more coherent document. And so first of all, the baseline kind of shows me that it's close to 0, that the shuffled documents behave the way I thought. They're not coherent, they're close to 0. So it kind of validates the fact that the coherence score makes sense, and it's probably a good measure of coherence. You can see a clear downward trend. I didn't put it on there, but if you do like a rolling average, it is a monotonic decrease, and it actually decreases by 15% over 50 years. And this is quite a clear trend, which was surprising. I wasn't expecting that at all. So, future directions. What I would like to do is to analyze what has driven this trend. 2 trends I found that I haven't presented before this is the fact that within the documents, the sentences are actually getting longer. So it might be that the sentences are actually driving textual coherence decline. The documents are also getting longer. So this is not just driven by the sentence length, but also the number of sentences per document are getting longer. And that might also be driving the systematic deterioration of the score. But even that, it would kind of give me, it still gives me an indication that the case law texts are getting less coherent, and if we can pinpoint why, that would be very helpful. But what about other texts, other types of texts, and other states? I did try and do the same thing on Arkansas. I found some very similar results, not as clear, like monotonically decreasing, but it was decreasing over time, which was kind of nice to see. And then obviously, the other thing I would like to look is investigating the causes. So are cases getting more complex? Is that what is driving the score as well? Or is it also societal issues that are driving this? And one of the things that would be really nice to do is, instead of having my baseline of shuffled cases, just like something that's not coherent, look at something talking about the same thing that is very coherent. So for example, I could take newspaper articles that talk about these cases and are meant for the general public, and see how the score is over time, whether it decreases as well, which could indicate that the complexity of the cases is just getting worse. or maybe it doesn't change and it's actually the language or the references in there that makes it worse to understand. So yeah, those would be my next step and the so what, I guess. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you so much to the CAP folks for having us and putting together this amazing data set. I